Jax has been part of the amazing Digital Circus longer than most people realize, and across every episode, small details have been quietly building a much bigger story. Hidden moments, past relationships, and one decision that may have changed everything. In this video, we're going to break down Jax's entire timeline in chronological order, because his story is way more complex than it first appears. Long before the purple rabbit, long before the sarcasm and the one-liners and the constant need to make everything into a joke, there was a real person on the other side of that headset. And based on what the community has pieced together from his memory flashes throughout the series, that person was already running from something. He appears to be fleeing on foot through a neighborhood, as if something had just gone very wrong very fast, and then, at some point, he ends up behind the wheel of a car, driving through a mountain forest in the dark. Eventually, he comes across a headset, seemingly inside an abandoned building, puts it on, and ends up in the Digital Circus, receiving the avatar of a purple cartoon rabbit from Caine, and losing, in the process, any clear memory of who he used to be. It is worth saying up front that this is not shown directly by the show as a clean sequence. It is something the community has inferred from the fragmented memory flashes Jax experiences at different points throughout the series. We do not know exactly what he was running from, and the show has been very deliberate about leaving that open. Something a lot of people forget is that Jax was nowhere near the first person to get trapped in there. By the time he arrived, the Digital Circus already had a small population of people who had been figuring out how to survive that place, mostly on their own, for years. Kinger had been there the longest by a wide margin. Ragata arrived before anyone else in the main group we follow. Ribbit had been there since 2010, and Kaufmo since 2013. So when Jax finally showed up in 2014, he was essentially walking into a community that had already formed its own rhythms and unspoken rules, and he had to find his place within that. What Jax did when he arrived is the part that tends to surprise people the most, especially if you only know him from the present-day version of the character. He made real friends, and there is actual visual evidence of this in episode 7, tucked inside one of the memory spheres in Caine's office, where Jax, Ribbit, and Kaufmo appear sitting together and drinking hot chocolate. Jax is genuinely smiling in it, and if you pay attention to how rarely that happens in the series proper, you realize pretty quickly how significant that image is. That smile does not have the detached, slightly smug quality of the expressions he puts on throughout the show. It has warmth in it, the kind that only shows up around people you actually trust. 2015 seems to have been relatively calm for Jax. Gangle arrived that year, and from what the timeline suggests, he was still holding on to the friendships he had built. His personality had not yet fully shifted into what we see in the series, and the group with Ribbit and Kaufmo was still intact. This period is easy to overlook because the show never shows it to us directly. But it matters, because it establishes who Jax was before everything changed and makes the contrast with his present self feel a lot more deliberate. 2016 is where the whole character pivots, and it is the year that explains basically every behavior Jax exhibits throughout the entire show. According to what the community has theorized based on the audio fragments and memory flashes scattered across the series, something happened between Jax and Ribbit during this year. A confrontation of some kind. The fragments suggest that words were exchanged, possibly harsh ones, and that whatever was said left things unresolved between them. The show never shows this directly though, so it is important to be clear that this is an interpretation from the fandom rather than something the series confirms outright. What does seem clear is that Ribbit abstracted shortly after, and that Jax was the last person to have had any real interaction with her before it happened. Abstraction in this show is not a clean ending. It is a total collapse of the self, a mental fracture so complete that the person essentially ceases to exist in any recognizable form. Ribbit could not hold on anymore, and whatever had passed between them before that happened, Jax was left holding the weight of something he never got to resolve. There was no second conversation, no chance to walk anything back, and that unresolved weight is, in a lot of ways, the foundation of every single thing he does after this point. What he did with that weight is the entire story of his character. He did not grieve openly, he did not talk about it, and he did not let himself fall apart the way most people would. Instead, he started dismantling every emotional connection he had left, piece by piece, until no one could get close enough to put him through that again. The cruelty that defines him throughout the series is not really a personality trait, so much as it is a permanent defensive posture, a way of keeping everyone at exactly the right distance so that losing them would not cost him anything. There is a small physical detail in the show that the fandom has connected to all of this, and I find it genuinely hard to dismiss. Jax's avatar originally had a tail. At some point, he lost it, and fans have theorized that the disappearance of that tail was directly tied to Ribbit's abstraction, the idea being that he literally lost a piece of himself when she went. What makes that theory even harder to ignore is the fact that his tail grows back during the episodes where his relationship with Pomni starts to develop. The show may never confirm it explicitly, but the timing is difficult to write off as coincidence. It is also worth mentioning that Ragata and Jax apparently used to be on much better terms before all of this. She has implied as much herself at various points in the series, and the way she interacts with him throughout the show, that mix of frustration and something that feels almost like grief, makes a lot more sense once you factor in that they likely had a real friendship that eroded somewhere along the way after 2016. By the time Pomni arrives in episode 1, Jax is already fully operating behind the wall he built after 2016. He messes with her from the moment she shows up, using Kinger's ongoing mental state to disorient her and treating the whole situation like personal entertainment. And yet, if you watch carefully, there is also something more functional happening underneath all of that. He is the one who actually suggests that Caine show Pomni how the circus works. He has been there long enough to understand the rhythms of that place, and even behind all the chaos, he is still paying attention to what is going on around him. But the most significant moment of episode 1 for Jax's character happens a little later, when Kaufmo's abstraction takes place. Jax is the one who opens Kaufmo's door. He sees what is happening inside, sees his old friend in the middle of a complete mental collapse, and then he turns around and runs. He leaves Pomni and Ragata behind to deal with it on their own and does not look back. That reaction, or the absence of one, says everything. Kaufmo was one of the 3 people in that hot chocolate photo, one of the last people who remembered who Jax was before 2016, and his response to watching that person fall apart is to get out of the room as fast as possible. It is not apathy. It looks a lot more like someone who cannot afford to feel what is actually happening to them. Episode 2 takes place in Candy Canyon, but what matters most for Jax's arc in this episode is something that happens back at the circus, the funeral for Kaufmo. And Jax does not go. While the rest of the group gathers to mark what happened to one of the people who had been part of his life since 2014, Jax stays away entirely. He simply stays away without acknowledging what happened, without leaving any trace that it even registered. That absence, for someone who used to be close enough to Kaufmo to share warm drinks and take photos together, is one of the loneliest things the show shows us about him. Episode 5 has a moment during one of the intermission sequences that is easy to miss but hard to forget once you notice it. Jax is running, which is not unusual in itself, but then he stops abruptly, right in front of Ribbit's old door, and just stands there staring at it. That is the whole scene. However, the fact that he stopped at all, that his body brought him to that specific door and held him there, says something the rest of his behavior in the series works very hard to contradict. Also, is during this episode that Ragata points out to him that he does not have any real friends left because the last close one he had is gone.
Do you have any actual friends? Not anymore.
That lands on him in a way that slips through before he can catch it. A reaction that is visible and immediate, and that he does not respond to the way he responds to most things people say to him. Episode 6 is where the dynamic between Jax and Pomni gets pushed into genuinely uncomfortable territory, and where some of the most revealing dialogue in the whole series happens. During the adventure, Jax tells Pomni that none of this is real, that the situation they are in does not carry real consequences, and that she needs to stop caring so much about all of it. He presents this as straightforward advice, but there is something underneath it that reads more like a coping philosophy he has been carrying for years. Then, when Pomni tries to get closer to him and he pulls away, he tells her directly that they were never friends, that there was no version of their relationship that was real. Pomni does not let that slide, and the question she asks stops him in a way that almost nothing else in the series does. She asks whether the way he operates, the not caring, the using people, the making everyone around him suffer for his own amusement, whether that is actually the reason the others abstract, whether his cruelty is not just a passive defense, but an active contribution to the mental deterioration of the people trapped in there with him. Jax starts to respond and then catches himself and backs off. He does not answer it, and the fact that he does not answer it is its own kind of answer. Then she asks what he would do if she abstracted tomorrow, and he says it plainly. He would move on and probably forget about her. Pomni reacts by attacking him physically, and his response to that is also revealing in its own way. He does not fight back. He lets it happen and then tells her that the reason he is not hitting back has nothing to do with caring about her. that she is just a toy to him like everyone else in the circus, and that if he ever spent real time with her, it was only to make this moment hurt more when it came. By episode 7, Jax is visibly at a breaking point in a way the series has been building toward since the pilot. There is a moment with Zubul that is worth paying attention to. She asks him, directly and without any of the usual social padding, whether he has someone waiting for him outside the circus, and Jax's reaction is strange for him. He hesitates. There is a pause that does not fit his usual rhythm, a kind of uncertainty that he does not typically allow himself, and then he says yes.
Yeah.
Whether that is the truth, a deflection, or something he is not even sure about himself, the show leaves open. But the hesitation is there, and it is the kind of detail that sticks. Later in the same episode, Jax finds his way into Caine's office and discovers a collection of memory spheres, recordings of past adventures from inside the circus. He comes across one that shows Ribbit and Kaufmo laughing together, and he stays with it for a long time. And just before that, in what the show frames as the central crisis of the episode, the group finds a console with 2 buttons, one to escape the system entirely and one to stay inside the circus. Without asking anyone else, Jax presses the red one. Just before he presses it, he gets flashes from his real life. Roads at night, car headlights cutting through a dark forest, the kind of images that come from somewhere painful rather than somewhere neutral. Whatever is waiting for him on the other side of that headset, he decided in that moment that he was not ready to face it. What happens immediately after the button scene is just as revealing as the decision itself. He calls Caine out with a level of directness and fury that does not feel performed, accusing him of manipulation, of lying about his inability to interfere with their minds, and of engineering the entire situation. Pomni, listening to all of it, starts connecting the same dots. The mask does not just slip in this scene, it comes off entirely, and what is underneath is someone who has been genuinely terrified for a very long time. By episode 8, something starts changing in how Jax processes the people around him. Hearing Kinger describe the actual history of the Digital Circus, the origin of the C&A company, what the system really is, and how it came to exist, dismantles a belief that Jax had been holding onto for years as a way to survive emotionally. He had convinced himself that the other people in the circus were not truly real in any meaningful sense, that they had all collapsed into cartoon archetypes, and that treating them as such was a reasonable response to the situation. Kinger's account makes that position impossible to maintain, and you can see it register on Jax in real time. He does not announce the shift or make anything out of it, but something behind his expression changes, and it does not change back.
This is real.
The finale picks up the moment episode 8 left off, with Caine gone and the circus already starting to come apart. No more adventures, no more distractions, just a quieter, emptier world and a group of people forced to sit with themselves and with what their situation actually is. Jax takes it the worst. He turns his anger on Kinger, convinced that deleting Caine destroyed the last thing keeping their existence stable, and the more the others try to make sense of what happened, the more hostile and withdrawn he becomes. While Pomni and Kinger start digging into how the digital world actually works, reaching into hidden parts of the system and learning to conjure, the rest of the group follows their lead. All of them except Jax, who keeps pulling away. Then comes the part the whole series had been building toward. Pomni gets access to Jax's memories, and everything the timeline has been piecing together finally gets confirmed on screen. The friendship with Ribbit, the loss, the decision to sabotage every bond before it could hurt him again. There is one scene the arc pivots on. Jax starts walking toward Pomni, like he is finally going to say the thing he has spent 8 episodes refusing to say. He gets halfway there, stops, thinks better of it, and turns around. He says nothing, and not long after, he abstracts. For the first time in the whole show, he is vulnerable right before the end, admitting he is exhausted and dropping the mask, but he still cannot make peace with himself or his past. He does not lose a fight, he just runs out of road, and the show never lets him finish the thought. Caine, carrying the guilt of everything he put them through, makes amends the only way left to him. He shows everyone a video that finally tells them the truth, giving them back their real names and their human forms so that, for the first time, every character knows exactly who they were on the other side of the headset. And that same video is what reveals what became of Jax. His real name was Leroy Mateo. Out in the real world, he was homeless for a while, then moved in with a close friend, found steady work, and got back on his feet. And now he goes out with those friends to, of all places, Riley's bar, the human form of Zubul. But Jax never sees any of it, because by the time the video plays, he is already gone. The title lands the hardest here. Everyone else gets to remember who they were. Jax was left with only the worst part, the defeat, and never got to know that on the other side, his life was actually getting better. He spent 10 years certain that reaching for people only ended one way, and he abstracted still believing it, one conversation short of finding out he was wrong. What the entire timeline adds up to, when you lay it out from start to finish, is a character who was never really the villain the surface reading suggests. He had friends. He cared about them in a way that was genuine and visible, at least for a while. Something happened, something that the show keeps in the shadows on purpose, and then he spent years building a version of himself that would never be put in that position again. Every prank, every cruel comment, every moment of deliberate distance from the people around him, all of it traces back to a loss he never processed and a wound he never let close. The wall was never about not caring. It was always about caring too much and having nowhere safe to put it. When I made the first version of this video, before the finale aired, I said the most honest ending for him would be something quiet. A moment where he finally stops running from whatever has been chasing him since before the circus and lets himself acknowledge what it cost him. I wanted him to let someone in. The show chose the other ending. He got halfway to Pomni, the closest he ever came to setting any of it down, and he turned around. No resolution, no second conversation, no version where he gets to be wrong about people in a way that saves him. The series had been this careful about keeping him unresolved precisely so it could end him unresolved. And as much as it hurts, it is hard to argue it is not the truest version of the character. So that is where his story actually landed. The question I keep coming back to is the one the show refuses to answer. What was he going to say to her, and would it have changed anything if he had just kept walking? I want to hear where you land on it. Do you read his ending as a tragedy the show earned, or as the one moment where it could have let him off the hook and chose not to? And across all 9 episodes now, which Jax moment hit you the hardest? Drop it in the comments. I am genuinely curious where everyone lands on this.